he gave me my first print. He was the first person that showed me that this was a process for sharing, that you make work, you can keep one for yourself if you want, but all of the rest are for others.
Hello, print friends, and welcome to the 48th episode of Pine Copper Lime, the internet's #1 printmaking podcast. I'm your host, Miranda Metcalf. I release weekly podcasts with people in the print world doing something a bit beyond the expected. So please subscribe on your podcast listening app of choice. You can also find Pine Copper Lime on Instagram and Facebook, and you can sign up for our monthly newsletter with print news from around the world, all at pinecopperlime.com. We also have a Patreon page where, if you like PCL and you want to toss a few bucks our way each month, it does make a world of difference to us. We have levels starting at just $1 a month, and if every person who listened to this podcast gave us that $1 a month, we could make this our full-time gig. That being said, we know this is still a weird time financially for many people out there, particularly those of us in the arts. So if you're not in a place right now to give financially, no sweat. But if you'd still like to support us, leave the show a review or tell a fellow printmaker about it. We're all in this together, you print legends. Printmaking forever, shun the non-believers. My guest this week is Ryan O'Malley. Ryan joined me from his studio in Corpus Christi, Texas, where he's currently the Associate Professor of Printmaking and Graduate Coordinator at Texas A&M University. But he grew up in Laramie, Wyoming, running around in the woods before studying art on a track scholarship at the University of South Dakota, where he was, as you'll hear, cruelly tricked into studying printmaking, but he's never looked back. I recorded our chat on April 20th this year, right at the beginning of the lockdown and all the uncertainty we were, and many of us still are, feeling about what our post-COVID world looks like. Listening to both of us do some real-time processing about what's going on was kind of like opening up a time capsule from what seems like a lot longer ago than 2 months. It was a bit of a reminder of what used to not be the normal. But it doesn't stop us from having a wonderful chat about printmaking, teaching, when Ryan broke his neck, and when he got to be the bumblebee spreading the knowledge of printmaking around the country during his time with Drive-By Press. And we got to do all of this while listening to the birds singing outside his studio. So, without further ado, sit back, relax, and prepare to be pollinated by Ryan O'Malley. Hi, Ryan. How's it going?
I'm doing pretty great, Miranda. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for asking. How is the quarantine treating you?
We're in a good situation as far as being educators, and we're very fortunate. We're salaried. We are living in a area that's not a big hot spot. We've got a house, got gardens, we've got plants and animals and a beach that we can walk to. So we're making the most of it. It's the teaching aspect has been challenging. Challenging is in a good way though, really thinking about ways to recontextualize printmaking in a way that can be absorbed online or done without a press. And there's been a lot of people doing really innovative things, seeing a lot of posts on Instagram and social media, people trying out projects with their students. And I think it's a really great time for sharing that sort of information. People are really encouraging others to take, their efforts and use them toward their own teaching pursuits. And so that part's been it's been really good. It's such a strange, surreal time, and there's so much uncertainty. And we're really just trying to do the best we can and trying to be positive for our students and, trying to be positive for ourselves as well. And, just thinking about all the sort of normalcies that we miss, but also a lot of the normalcies that we should really be doing away with as a society.
Yeah.
The inequities are really laid bare, and we're very much aware of that. We're getting a stimulus check that we really don't need. I mean, we really, we're thinking about like ways that we can use those funds to help other people, whether it's the food bank here or some friends that are in struggling with it. And, that's just one of the sort of surreal aspects of all of this and the sort of just the idea that there's a lot of inequity that's being exposed. And I really hope that we're paying attention as a global society to it, not just as an American society. I mean, also the reading stories every day about how nature is rebounding in different ways really quickly just because of this pause in our activity. There's scientists that record the vibrations of the earth, or different animal, different organisms that they can't hear because of the seismic traffic of humans that all of a sudden they can. So they're trying to record as much as they can with this sort of opportune time. It's just really a surreal. There's so much worry for others and worry for ourselves. And how are you doing with all of this?
No, I was thinking about what you were saying about kind of, being comfortable and in this weird situation where, Tim and I are the same way, where we're okay right now. And some days we're actually having kind of a good time because of it. And that like, oh wow, we haven't had to go into work but it's always overshadowed by knowing, and I think to some extent in the collective subconscious feeling the danger and the worry and the pain and the trauma that's going on around the world, that while touch wood, things are okay for us right now. We're still getting paid for right now. And sometimes I'll even go a couple days where I don't think about it. And then it'll hit me because it's become a new normal to stay home every day. So you're not thinking about it as much.
But I mean, it really puts your in check, like frequently.
For sure.
And I think a lot of people are sort of in need of that check-in. And I think, it'll be interesting to see where it goes. I mean, things have to change after this. They have to change. We have some really important decisions to make as a global society about that COVID-19 generation that's definitely on the way. I'm pretty sure about that. So
you're like, oh yeah. So I know you and your work just kind of through the internet by reputation. I always am curious when it's people that I've known and been in the sort of printmaking circle with, if we did meet in passing, maybe at an SGCI at some point and just it got blurred together. But I would love it if you could give a little introduction for yourself so people who aren't familiar with you can just learn who you are, where you are, and what you do.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I was born and raised in Laramie, Wyoming, which is a little college town that's about 2 hours north of Denver, and grew up doing very Wyoming things. I did a lot of camping, hiking, and fishing with my family, and did a lot of sports. I mean, there's really not much to do between September and June in Wyoming because it's snowing. Athletics was a really good outlet for me in addition to art and reading. And so those were sort of my main things. And I ended up going to the University of South Dakota on swimming and track scholarships. So talked to you earlier when we were kind of warming up about getting tricked into printmaking.
Yeah.
And I had done a lot of ceramics in high school. I had no idea really what printmaking was. We didn't even do lino cuts or any basic screen printing or anything like that in high school or junior high. And I was in a freshman drawing class my first semester of school at USD, and Lloyd Menard was my teacher. And I think that I responded to him really well because he was like a drill sergeant or a coach. He was coming yelling at his students. I mean, he had a bullwhip that sometimes he would
Oh
bring
my
in and crack,
gosh.
and or a whistle. And I don't know, that maybe that jock mentality just really
Yeah.
responded to that sort
Yeah.
of that rigorous training.
That
Yeah,
Pavlovian response. Yeah.
right. And so at the end of that first semester, like I was a really strong draftsman. You know, I was had always been drawing, so you know, I was probably one of those kids that came in thinking that I knew how to draw and had a
Hmm.
lot less to learn than I really did. Um, but I, uh, you know, at the end of that semester, Lloyd took me aside and I don't know if I should do it. Well, everybody does Lloyd's voice. He's like, you know, you've got a really good hand, and you should take my printmaking class next semester, and
Ah.
just keep quiet about it because I don't tell this to many freshmen. You know, I usually have more upperclassmen in that class, but you're really good, so you should enroll. And so I'm like, ooh, yeah, like I'm, you know, that competitive nature of me is
Yeah.
like, yeah, I got to go for
You're the
it.
chosen one.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm the chosen one, of course. And so I got to that class that following spring semester, and like 80% of that drawing class was in that class. He told that same thing to everybody. And so it's like this bait and switch technique to get people into his printmaking classes. And so that's kind of how I got started in it. And I didn't stick with printmaking because I got it. It's because it was so perpetually frustrating to me. And
Hmm.
I couldn't get over those sort of basic humps of making work that I was really, where I felt really confident that I understood the process and the materials. And it just was this constant frustrating challenge that I just could not let go of.
Hmm.
So that was sort of what kept me invested in it. But not only that, at this point in time, University of South Dakota had one of the best MFA programs in the country for printmaking. And
Oh,
not
wow.
because of the amount of faculty, there was just Lloyd, not because of the space, you know, not because of the amount of equipment or anything that we had, but that there were more, I think, per capita, more printmaking MFAs coming out of there that went into teaching in the United States than any other school of its size. And there was an amazing group of graduate students while I was there. A lot of really great printmakers that are out practicing and teaching now, like Andy DeCon at UNT and Brett Anderson, Matt Egan, Susan Hegestad, who's still in Vermilion, Kevin Bowman. There was like all these amazing grads there at that time. Even students like, well, in undergrads, Valerie Luth from Tugboat
Oh, yeah.
was studying there, and then her counterpart at Tugboat, Paul Roden, came in as a graduate student. There's just so many great artists and really great people that came through South Dakota at that time. And, you know, I was doing sports, you know, a dual sport athlete, and trying to make art simultaneously they were somewhat opposed in the amount of time that it took to become successful in either. And, you know, for that first 2 years, I sort of struggled through that sort of balance, but also was struggling with sort of the people that I identified with.
Hmm.
I was beginning to have a really hard time going out to these, you know, parties in this little town that was full of athletes that just wanted to get drunk and hook up and
Yeah.
do things. And on the other hand, we would go over, you know, one of the houses of one of the graduate students and barbecue and talk about music and talk about art, and faculty
Hmm.
members showed up and undergraduate students and artists in the community. And it just was this really amazing environment. And I mean, international students, you know, a lot of printmakers and painters and ceramicists from other countries that were there. It was this amazing group of people that really loved to get together and share. And Lloyd was at the center of it all, sharing stories from his past, usually really seedy stories that people laugh and really stick in your mind. At 19, after my second year of college, I was with a friend in Delaware, and we were body surfing in these really, like a really strong beach break. And at one point, my arms and legs got tangled up and the wave threw me headfirst into the bottom of the ocean, and my head stopped, but my body kept going.
Oh.
And I broke my neck, my C3 and C4. And so I, this was in it was June 8th of 99. And so I spent the rest of that summer in a neck brace and just sort of slowly rehabilitating myself and just contemplating the demise of my athletic career. Not that it was going to carry me to college anyway, but I did a lot of drawing at that time just as a way to just pass the time, and got back to school that following semester in the fall and had this, I mean, even when I was laying on the beach with my neck broken, I knew that my life was about to change and knew that I needed to get serious about something, because at this point I'd just been sort of freewheeling, sort of rolling with the punches and not really giving all of my energies to one thing. They were really kind of scattered. And so I'm going to put everything I had into making art, and really that's when printmaking started to make sense. And the way that it made sense to me is I started translating the things that I knew from athletics into the things that I was doing in printmaking. And when I say that, the sports that I did with swimming and track, you were competing against yourself first and foremost. That was the main thing. So you would make these great advances, and then there were periods of time where you would stagnate or you would plateau. And that's when you really start thinking about the minutia of what you're doing. And so when I started applying that idea of the minutia of training in athletics, doing like one little thing over and over again that seems insignificant, but that little insignificant thing might make you swim 1/100 of a second faster or jump 1/4 of an inch higher, which is still like, that ends up being a major gain, So like that application of that understanding into printmaking and really sort of investing in the minutia of the practice in order to get better, and thinking about it holistically, but also thinking about little tiny elements that I could be improving. And so that's where I really started to kind of cut my teeth and get a foundation under me. And then there was Frogman's. So that was one of the most sort of significant introductions that I had into printmaking as a community. I think it was 2000 was the first Frogman's that I went to, although it had been there right under my nose for my first 2 years of college. And so I took some classes, and, when I explain Frogman's to people that have never been, I say, you can take one class in a certain process for a week, or you can take a class, over 2 weeks in 2 different disciplines. But by the time you leave, you're going to have 100 new best friends. And that was really what happened at Frogman's. I met people from every walk of life, and everybody was interested in sharing and camaraderie, and, not just through art, but just sharing personal experiences and just sharing, just generosity of heart and of mind. And I fell in love with it at that point. That's when I really fell in love with printmaking, was through Frogman's. And I met a lot of people that have been my friends from then until today. I know in Joseph Velasquez's talk with you, he spoke a lot of John Hancock. And John Hancock, I can't think of anybody who has introduced more people in printmaking than John Hancock. He is so perpetually interested in people. He's a consistent inquisitor. He sat next to me in that first Frogman's class and just kept asking me questions, like all day, every day. I'm like, who is this guy? And, and then he'd start introducing me to other people. He introduced me to Joseph Velasquez, I think the following year at Frogman's, or maybe 2 years later, Katie Seals, and like all these people that have become my closest friends, and that I've shared really amazing experiences in printmaking with, really started through John. And so I have to give him props. He was the very first person that ever gave me a print, just because, just here, you should just have this. And and everybody that knows John has had this experience. He's just one of the most generous people I know. And he gave me my first print. He was the first person that showed me that this was a process for sharing, that you make work, you can keep one for yourself if you want, but all of the rest are for others. And that really that never left me. And it really sort of formed my whole philosophy of why printmaking, why for me and why for everybody else. And that very print is framed in my bedroom. It's like right next to my bed. I wake up every morning seeing a big skull with an eyeball on it. There's a third eye in the middle of it. So that's one of the more formative beginnings for me. Mm-hmm. Some other things that you may not have come across in my CV, because I don't think they're in there anymore, but to really explain the most significant experiences that I've had on my practice as a printmaker and as an educator and as a person, because all of those things are intertwined. I went to LSU for graduate school and had a perfect grad school experience. There's it's different for everybody, and it's also exactly the same. And I had one of those things. I had that unique experience that everybody else has, and made some good work. Made way more work that I would never want to show anybody.
Yeah.
And had a great group of grads and undergrads there to learn from, and great faculty to learn from. And going from Wyoming and South Dakota, which, mountain state and Midwest state, both small towns, a lot of similarities, but going to Baton Rouge, which is a bigger city in the South, was just such an eye-opening experience. There's the wealth of cultures that exist there. And I mean, New Orleans is just one of the most incredible cities in the world because of that, because of it's a birthplace of so many amazing and also really tragic aspects of our culture in the United States. And I got to see all of that. And I split 2 weeks before Katrina came. I had graduated, had a premonition, because there was one hurricane that went to the left of Louisiana and there's to the right of Louisiana. And I was like, the next one's coming right up the middle. And sure enough, 2 weeks to the day after I left, it hit. And I had a lot of friends that were still in Baton Rouge, and it was and New Orleans, and it was a really scary and difficult time for a lot of people. But that wasn't the really, I mean, grad school is really significant, but I went immediately into graduate school because I felt if I didn't do that, if I took a year off, I'd end up living in my mom's basement and working construction. So I was like, no, I got to go to grad school, which I don't recommend for everybody. I was also a little bit green. I just sort of got the ball rolling in printmaking and didn't come out of grad school being an expert in my field, as grad school is really sort of supposed to do, or an expert on your own work. I was definitely not an expert on my own work at that time. So I moved back to Wyoming and lived in my mom's basement and worked construction through a Wyoming winter for one of my best friends. But 30 below and 60 mile an hour winds when you're up on a roof trying to hammer down shingles is not the way that I wanted to use my degree. Yeah. So I moved 2 hours down the road to Denver, and through a good friend was able to get a job working for this immersive artist named Lonnie Hands-On, who has been living and working in Denver for decades. And Lonnie's very theatrical and very and ephemeral. He's built cabarets there in Denver, in the 16th Street Clock Tower, and there's this big history of the ball sculpture that's in front of Coors Field there that he had done. And every year he'd built these huge cakes for the Denver Pride Parade. He was a really big artist involved in Denver Pride, and has been doing immersive environments too for his whole life. I think before that really became a thing, before that immersive space like Meow Wolf and Otherworld Ohio and some of those spaces, like Lonnie was really doing a lot of work with, artists around the country in that. So, the difference between printmaking that I immediately had to figure out, where, I was working on mezzotints in grad school and my face was a foot away from my plate most of the time. And, I kind of took that same, I practiced that same sort of effort with everything that I was doing with Lonnie. He'd, smack brushes out of his hands and like, no, this is only going to look good for 1 month from 15 feet away in the park. So don't need to take this much time. You know, he taught me how to track my time to figure out how long it was going to take to get from one thing to the next. And also how to, you know, when you're making work, you want to find the fastest, cheapest, and easiest way to get from point A to point B without sacrificing the integrity of your idea. Mm-hmm. Or as John Hancock would say, caveman no fool, caveman use tool. So, you know, Lonnie, it's a whole different perspective. So, you know, things were ephemeral and they were only going to be seen under very specific circumstances, not in a frame on a wall that was lit just so, you know, people might be moved. Or this thing is, you know, I was working with like electroluminescent wires and fiber optic cables, and I was working with clay and all kinds of weird mosaic and you know, building relationships with people he was outsourcing work to. So that was this really impactful experience on my print work, because I was approaching creative practice from the opposite end of the spectrum from where it started, right? I didn't think it could get any further away. But that work for Lonnie at that time was really seasonal. Like the Christmas sort of, the holidays were really, really his busy season, and couldn't keep on full-time sort of assistance beyond those times, you know, because it was feast or famine if you're just a working artist. Yeah. And so I started looking for other jobs in Denver. I was looking on Craigslist every day when I knew this gig was about to end. And at one point I found this Craigslist ad that was for a studio assistant for an artistic stonemason. And I was looking at the ad, and it was asking for somebody who had fine art experience, construction experience, landscaping experience, graphic design, photography experience, shop management experience, organizational skills. And I was like, wow, I have all of these things. So I put a cover letter together and went, and I got an interview like maybe 1 or 2 days later with this man, Andy Dufford, who ran a studio called Chevo Studios. And so I went to their office and met with him, and I was like, you know, I'm gonna take some mezzotins along, just because I have no other way to show him that I have any sort of skills whatsoever in this interview form. So I took the mezzotins. He talked to me about the job, and I asked if I could show the mezzotins, and I spread them out on this architectural table. And he was looking at them, and he's like, you know, I've taken a few print classes, and I'm aware of the mezzotin process, and I can tell from these works that you have a facility for tools and patience. And those are the two things that that was like instant guru status for me. There's no semester that goes by that I'm not saying that to my students. Yeah. You're here above all things to learn facility for tools and patience, because not everybody is going to go out and continue making art. Not everybody's going to continue making prints. But with a facility for tools and patience, you can learn how to apply your understanding and your thought process and your skill set to any problem, you know, to anything. So that was that initial interview. And so he said, well, there's the second part of the interview. And I was like, oh, this is interesting, which was the next day. He said, I want you to come out to the carving studio. So I showed up the next day, and there was a big block of granite sit in the middle of this dirt yard, and there was this huge chainsaw next to it that was connected to some water hoses. It was a big hydraulic chainsaw, and he told me to get up dressed up in all this water safety gear. And he's like, okay, so here's your physical challenge. Your job is to plunge this chainsaw into this block of granite, and and I want you to do it smoothly and efficiently. And what I want you to do is, like, I don't know if he said this or if this has just become part of the story, because it's another sort of mantra that I use with my students, but he might have said, I want you to put your mind on the end of the tool, like at the end of the blade. So it was like reverse sword in the stone. You know, if I could sink the chainsaw into the stone, then I would be victorious. You know, I started plunging really slowly, and by taking his advice, I could tell if I got to leaning one direction or the other, because you could feel that slight tension differential. And plunged into the stone. I got the job. So I spent the next year and a half carving stone, and it became one of the most centering things I've ever done. I mean, the amount of labor was brutal. I mean, I'd come home every day with my knuckles would just be covered in blood and scabs. Sometimes blades would come off of the ends of the inch grinders and bounce off my chest and fly 30 feet away into a field. And, no serious injuries. I was carving stone every day, focusing my mind at the end of the tool and feeling the difference of each material that I was carving. So sandstone, Navajo ruby sandstone felt very different than a block of granite or a blue limestone from Pennsylvania or, shale. I got so focused and I got so sensitive to how to use tools and how to immediately sort of understand surface and how it was responding and sort of working in tune with surface instead of against it. There was at one point, Andy was like, okay, so it took the universe 4 billion years to make this rock and you're undoing that in seconds. Be thoughtful and be patient, take your time, think things through. And so the education of working for Lonnie and working for Andy was, I think, far greater than anything I learned in graduate school, because I was putting the things that I learned in graduate school to a practical test in something that was outside of my range of experience. And I succeeded. I mean, there's also a difference between a grade and a paycheck. I mean, that's a huge motivator as well. But, the very last project I got to do with Andy was build an amphitheater in the south rim of the Grand Canyon. We built the Mather Point Amphitheater. Wow. And so I came in onto the job late. This was actually, I had worked for Andy and I'd gone off and taught for 2 years at Davidson College, and I toured with Drive By Press for a year and then did this job with Andy. He called me in, and they had done a lot of the construction on the amphitheater already. And I came in to do a lot of the sort of fine work, the fine detail, which for the first 3 days was just hitting rock with an axe to shape it to look like it was shaped by water and wind. But we were right on the edge of the Grand Canyon. I was right there for a month working with a crew of masons from all over the country. And every day, at least once a day, one of the crew members would just get stuck, just staring out into the canyon, like staring down into the bottom of it, staring across it for 10 minutes, just not moving. And I did the same thing. It was just the most amazing experience to be a part of. And the very first function that amphitheater was used for was a immigration and naturalization ceremony, which I, also think is beautiful. Yeah. But that's the only work of art that I can say definitively that I had a hand in that has been seen by millions of people, right. And that will hopefully outlast humanity, I mean, not hopeful in humanity's demise, but right. Hopeful in the understanding that this amphitheater is going to be here through millennia, that can be used in some regard. And print is a pretty ephemeral medium, and this sort of permanence, the patience and permanence that was involved in carving stone shaped my perspective as a printmaker from the opposite perspective of where I was with Lonnie. So printmaking sort of sat in the middle of these two poles, and those things set my confidence in place to where I realized that I could figure out how to make anything. Doesn't mean I'm going to make everything good, by no means is everything I make going to be good, but I can figure it out. And that's a wall that so many people have a difficult time climbing over. But, that was the experience that got me there. Everybody else has got their own unique story that put them into that place where you finally get it, where it all clicks. And realize that the skill set that you have can translate through many, many different types of media or challenges. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And what I was thinking about hearing you sort of tell the story is so often we get told to compartmentalize things. That, your job doing construction, that's just you paying your dues. It's not going to have anything to do with your art career. Labor is something for the uneducated, and you're educated, you're just doing your time. You'll get your reward, right? Or even vice versa. And I think it's really always significant to point out that everything truly is connected, and the skills that you learn in a rock quarry you can apply to your woodcuts. And I think maybe even super significantly in our current time, when there are probably quite a few art students who are looking to graduate in the next month or so here, who might find themselves not doing jobs in the arts for a year or two while our world kind of finds its new way forward after the pandemic and the recession. It just seems really good and timely to have that particular conversation right now, basically, because it's those students have been on my mind lately.
Yeah, I mean, it's really seeing it's seeing it holistically. It's seeing the connectivity of it all. And I think as a culture, we're so used to immediacy, and we're not prone to thinking about time in a broader perspective. Okay, if it's going to take a year or two that you're going to be doing something that you really don't want to be doing, in the course of our, hopefully everybody's long productive lives, that is a blip. There was a particular experience that I was having one time that was really trying on me, and I was really not sure that I was doing the right thing. And I talked to my mom, and she wasn't prone to saying prophetic things all the time, but she was like, you know what, this is a year contract. You can do anything for a year. She's like, do you think I wanted to go through therapy for a year? No, but I did it. Like, looking back on it, it's a really short amount of time by comparison. And so I keep that in mind anytime things are getting really difficult. I'm like, okay, let's put this into perspective. Like, yeah, this feels like this is awful. This quarantine is awful. It's really, really affecting people in very significant ways. And I'm not to take that away from anybody, but we also have to look at it in perspective of, this is hopefully a fixed period of time for all of us, and things will start to rebound. We have to put our heads down. I think it's just accepting that this is the reality that we're living in. And it's we've really globally been protected from anything of this nature for 100 years, that like everybody is being affected by this all across the world, and accepting that this is the reality, and we have to face it, that we can't deny that this is happening. We can't pretend that things are normal. We have to face it. We have to recognize it and figure out how we can make this time better for ourselves and those around us, And I was watching the Dave Chappelle documentary of him winning the Mark Twain Prize in Literature, or in humor. And he got on stage and when he was receiving the award, and it was talking about how this is, Toni Morrison said, this is when artists go to work. And there's a whole beautiful continuation of this quotation, but looking at the way, if we look at our artist community as printmakers, because we know a lot of people, everybody's making masks. People are using their 3D printers to, help health workers by printing all sorts of equipment and things that can help make the masks more comfortable, or face shields, or, sharing with other educators, just like sharing assignments. Sharing demo videos that they made, to help each other through this. And I see a lot of people going to work right now. And it's the one thing that makes a person feel hopeful through all this. When our governments are failing us in the ways that we need them the most, like, people are responding in the ways that are really making positive difference.
Yeah. And I think what's so nice is that it can be both, where you can be surprised and also completely understanding it. Because I think one of the things that we've talked about earlier was how you and I have both had that experience of that intrinsic generosity of printmakers really throughout the world, how you can show up in a different country and find the printing studio there and just send a message, and someone's going to say, yeah, come on by, and then we'll go get a beer afterwards. And I think that real sense of global community, it comes out in times like these where a lot of people have said, oh, the world feels small now, but I feel like it's kind of always felt small to people in printmaking.
That generosity, I mean, outside of Frogman's, where it really sort of solidified for me and a lot of my beliefs as a printmaker and as an educator and as a human being came from my experience touring with Drive By Press. You know, Joseph and Greg from Drive By had been touring together for, I think, 4 or 5 years up to that point, and had sort of made enough headway through their incredible efforts over 4 years and all the places that they'd gone to split into 2 operations. So Greg was going to focus mostly on the East Coast, and Joseph was going to focus mostly on the West Coast, because Greg was a little bit more linked to the East in terms of family and such, and Joseph as well with family in Texas. And so the fall of 2000, and we did go quite a few spaces on the East Coast, which was really great. And then the following year in 2010, an artist by the name of Nick Alley and I toured. Joseph was kind enough to switch cars with me. We got the Honda Element, and he got my now extinct Oldsmobile Alero. And he gave us the keys, and he was like, go keep spreading the ink, And so Nick and I, we talked in our lectures about having the fervor of the convert. Joseph and Greg had been sort of proselytizing the print gospel to the point where we were all on board. And when we went out on tour, it was this really incredible experience to get to see firsthand what is happening, the trends that are happening in American printmaking from coast to coast, to see what people were doing in their studios, in their shops, not just the work that they were making, but how they were arranging studio spaces, how they were arranging shops, and then getting to be like bees, spreading pollen from flower to flower. We'd go to one university and there might be a faculty member or a student that's doing some process that's innovative or interesting, and we see how it's done. And, printmakers, with a form of bragging for us is sharing what we did. You don't hide your secrets in the vault. You show them to somebody else and then let them sort of take them in their own direction. And so we would learn something at one location and we would take it to the next location and be like, hey, just look at this thing that we just learned. And we would, try to demonstrate it or pass it along. And, going back to the idea of generosity, at every single place that we stopped, the people that were hosting us, whether they were faculty members or students, would just give you their shirt off their back, open up their homes to you, open up their studios, their families, their friends, take us to their favorite restaurants, show us natural wonders that they loved. Getting a chance to do that for a year and meeting students from all over the country and seeing how the proof is in the pudding with when we say printmakers are generous people. Like we got to experience that every single day. Every day was just a joy. Just like, even when it was hard, even when we were sick, when we'd been on the road, hadn't slept, when we were, getting tired of that person that was sitting less than 6 feet from you all times, that there was still like incredible amounts of joy in every single day because of the generosity that was shown to us, but also just to like put in perspective what we were doing, like to see that we were touring around the country, showing people our love for printmaking and having that returned to us in kind. Like, imagine what it's like to live like that, It's an experience that I mean, it was one of the most important things that I'd ever done, and it happened right at the right time too. And I, really am so indebted to Joseph for that opportunity, because it brought everything together. All of those experiences that I had in making, in struggling, in working, in teaching, in organizing a studio space, in learning how to communicate with people. If you're giving talks every single day of your life, you get really good at doing things on the fly, which was not something that I was used to doing. I mean, I really had difficulties communicating in a really articulate way prior to that experience, because it wasn't something that I was practicing every day or thoughtfully, not just articulately, but thoughtfully, being able to be thoughtful on the fly. And, so that really just sort of tied up those whole experiences together in a way that made me ready at that time to be an educator, to really respond in a way that I knew I could be a better mentor and a more thoughtful person and a better advocate for my students. And it's right at that time that I landed down here in Corpus Christi at Texas A&M Corpus Christi.
So how long have you been at Corpus Christi then?
I've been here for a decade.
Okay.
I've been here for 10 years now. And it's the longest I've lived anywhere outside of Wyoming. I maintain a Wyoming phone number, but that's all I've got left, aside from my family. But, Corpus Christi, I never thought I would be living in Texas. I never thought I would be living in South Texas, which is a world unto its own. I mean, keep Austin weird is just like a corporate slogan at this point.
Uh-huh.
Corpus is weird. Corpus is weird.
Corpus walks the walk.
It's a city with so many unique identities. It's an oil town. It's a beach town. There's a lot of industry here, but there's also like a lot of tourism and surf culture, and it's ranching, and it's a Latinx community, and it's what else could I say? There's so many things. It's a fishing town. It's got this really closely knitted arts community. It's a really big, small city. I think we're the 59th biggest city in the country, but it feels really, really small. I came down here kind of like at Davidson in a visiting artist position that ended up turning into a tenure track, but I always kind of felt like I might keep one foot slightly out the door, because I just wasn't sure that this was the right place for me. But the thing that happened immediately, and one thing that I talk to new faculty that arrive here about is your impact on the students here is felt immediately. And their impact on you is subsequently felt immediately, because we're a pretty regional serving university. I think our enrollment might be a little bit down right now, but we're around 12,000 students. We're part of the A&M system. But we largely serve the sort of Corpus Christi area and the Rio Grande Valley that's south of us to the border of Mexico. Although there's a lot more students coming in from, San Antonio, Austin, Houston, Dallas. We're really known for our marine biology. We've got the Hart Research Center here, which is a real big research institution in that field. But the students here are, it's a largely first generation college student campus. Students that really haven't had that sort of mentorship from their parents about what to expect. So this is a very new experience for them and for their families. And a lot of students have families, they have children, or they're taking care of family members. We've got a lot of veterans. We've got a lot of students on the LGBTQ spectrum. We're a Hispanic serving institution. There's, most of the students, a lot of them work full time, or, almost all of them have part-time jobs. So it's a really diverse place to be. And the students are they're hungry for education. They might not like outwardly project it, but they really are when you're giving them your attention and your mentorship. The way that they respond, it is so fulfilling and so impactful. And a lot of these students have not been places before. They haven't traveled. They haven't had opportunities to even go as far north as Austin, which is 3 hours from here. I can't name the amount of students that have gone to Austin for the Print Austin Print Month that happens in January. A lot of that's their first time getting north of San Antonio. I mean, There was one time there was a print conference in the Gulf Print Storm in Beaumont, Texas, that Zinio Fedorchenko put together. And this was my first semester here, and I got, a van of about 8 students together, and we're driving up to Beaumont, which is 4 hours, like northeast of here. And a couple of hours away, one of the students is like, "Oh, wow, the trees are getting taller." I was like, "Well, that's an interesting sentiment." I was like, "How far north have you been?" And she's like, "San Antonio." And I was like, "Your mind is about to get blown.
Yeah.
And we're going to see cypress trees. We're going. There's going to be alligators. It's like just being able to provide students that experience here, it's so invaluable and it changes them. You know, my favorite type of student is the one who my first experience with them is them cringing in a corner and being too afraid to talk about their work. And by the time they finish the program are sort of mentors of the studio. The amount of lives who get to cross paths by doing this, it's something that is difficult and tiring and frustrating as it can be. It's like the most rewarding profession that I could imagine myself in. My teaching and my creative practice and the way that I live my life as a human being are all sort of linked through the same practice, if that makes sense. I don't delineate those things from each other anymore, because it's all just, again, coming back to this idea of a holistic practice. It's all part of the same thing. I'm a bit of a chameleon in my work, I've realized over time, but a lot of that's because I want to continue to learn either new like technical approaches or even new aesthetic or conceptual approaches to making, so that I can impart that on my students. But on the other hand, I use my students as guinea pigs for things that I don't know how to do, and I watch their results, and I learn from them all the time too. So it's a pretty wonderful give and take. So.
Yeah, because I was one of the questions that I had for you that was sort of specific to your work is when you call yourself a chameleon. I feel like when you go through your portfolio, you see so many different media represented. Mezzotint, reduction, woodcut, like all kinds of different things. And I was curious about why you found yourself having that range and that difference between, really like versatility versus sort of speciality within your practice. But it makes sense that kind of passion for that knowledge, but also to first and foremost be an educator and be able to impart that onto other people as part of like that whole different journey of your own artistic practice.
Well, I mean, that's not something that, that's something I think about a lot, and it's a source of frequent insecurity for me. It is, and I think, but it's insecurity is something that keeps you hungry, Mm-hmm. If you channel it the right way, obviously it can be a crippling difficulty, but if you can figure out how to channel insecurity or balance it with confidence, I think it can be a benefit. It can keep you hungry.
Yeah, definitely. We've come to the end of my recording time, but before we go, I definitely want to make sure that people know how to find you, whether on Instagram or through your website, to see your work, learn about maybe coming to Corpus Christi to study if they're inspired, and just all that good stuff.
I'm on Instagram at Ryan O'Malley Art, and there's a link through there to my website, which is so far behind in updating. That aspect suffered. But yeah, those are the two platforms that I can be found, and we accept grads in the early parts of the year. I'm not only want hardworking, excited, community-based practitioners to come down and study with me, but I also want to be a resource for students that are looking for programs in general, because this isn't going to be a fit for everybody. But I know a lot of programs out there, graduate programs, that have faculty members that students might work really well with, or fellow grads, or a city that might just be right for that person. So I love being a resource in that regard, just to find ways to support people.
Well, thank you. And it was so nice to connect, and I'll be in touch as the podcast starts to develop and when I think it'll come out. And yeah, it's been super great to chat, Ryan. I'm so glad we got to connect and know each other a little bit better, and I'm sure it won't be the last time.
I hope not. And yeah, please stay in touch, and I hope you get some good nuggets out of that conversation.
Well, that's our show for this week. Join me again next week when I have a very special guest, a Spanish tattoo artist who goes by the mononym Miriam. She uses traditional Indian woodblocks to plot out markings on her clients before tattooing them by hand poking. We have a wonderful conversation about the ways in which textile, woodblock, and tattooing all intersect, and how they all can take you around the world. You won't want to miss it. This episode, like all episodes, was written and produced by me, Miranda Metcalf, with editing help from Timothy Pauschak and music by Joshua Weber. I'll see you next week.